Some people are made famous in a single season. Kim Hieora wasn't. She feels like the kind of actress who arrived suddenly because that is how the public remembers impact. One role, one face, one energy sharp enough to cut through the screen. But that version of the story is too easy. The truth is slower, harder, and maybe more interesting. Before people started recognizing her name, Kim Hieora had already spent years inside the industry without the kind of spotlight most viewers think success begins with. She was not built by instant hype. She was built by waiting, by stage work, by long stretches of effort that did not come with applause loud enough to change a life overnight. That matters because it changes how you see her. She was never just a breakout actress. She was someone who stayed in the dark long enough to learn how not to fear it. And maybe that is why her screen presence feels the way it does. Not soft, not careless, not innocent in the simple way some actresses are introduced to the world. There is something watchful about her, something that feels earned, as if she understands people from the inside out before she ever steps into a scene with them. That kind of presence usually does not come from comfort. It comes from years of trying, failing, adjusting, surviving, and refusing to disappear. So who was Kim Hieora before the public really looked at her? Not a headline, not a scandal, not even a star yet. She was a working actress carrying the kind of dream that becomes dangerous when it lasts too long. The kind where you have to keep believing in yourself even when the world gives you very little reason to. She moved through musical theatre first, building discipline the hard way. And theatre does that to people. It strips vanity fast. It teaches timing, stamina, control, and the brutal fact that talent alone is never enough. You have to keep showing up, keep sharpening, keep finding new ways to stay alive in front of an audience. Kim Hieora did that for years. And that is what makes her story different from the actresses who arrive already polished for television. She does not feel manufactured, she feels forged. Can viewers sense that without even knowing her history? Maybe that is why people reacted so strongly when she finally broke through. Because sometimes the screen responds differently to actors who have waited too long to be seen. There is hunger in them, not desperation exactly, something heavier, a tension that makes even stillness look charged. By the time the public really noticed Kim Hieora, she did not look like a beginner discovering confidence. She looked like someone who had spent too many years learning how to survive without being chosen, and had finally reached the moment where the world could no longer pretend not to see her. That is the real beginning of her story, not the fame, not the controversy, but the long, invisible road before either one arrived. And maybe that is the first question her life asks the audience. When a person spends that many years fighting to be seen, what happens when the spotlight finally comes and refuses to look away? Then came the role that changed the temperature around her. Not just because it was successful, not just because people watched it, but because it gave Kim Hieora something far more dangerous than attention. It gave her an image the public could not shake. For years, she had been the actress waiting in the dark, building herself out of persistence and endurance. Then the glory arrived, and suddenly all that waiting condensed into one unforgettable impact. This was not the kind of breakthrough built on sweetness or easy charm. It was built on discomfort, on menace, on the kind of performance that does not ask the audience to love you, only to remember you. And once viewers saw her there, it became almost impossible to look at her without feeling a little unsettled. That is what made the moment so electric. Because Kim Hieora did not just appear in a hit drama, she took hold of a mood inside it. The world of the glory was already dark, already full of cruelty and unresolved pain. But her presence gave that cruelty a face people could recognize instantly. She did not play evil loudly. She played it with confidence, with nerve, with the kind of chilling ease that makes an audience wonder what is more frightening, rage, or someone who no longer needs to raise their voice to hurt you. And that changes everything for an actress. So let me ask you something. When a role is this strong, what do people really fall in love with? The performance, or the feeling of danger the actor leaves behind? That question matters because the glory did not make Kim Hieora famous in a neutral way. It made her unforgettable through fear, tension, and moral ugliness. She became one of those faces viewers immediately associate with a certain kind of threat. Not because she was doing too much, but because she understood exactly how little she needed to do. A look, a smile, a stillness that felt wrong in the most effective way. That is the kind of acting that stays with people longer than dialogue ever does. And maybe that is why the role felt bigger than a normal breakthrough. It did not simply say, "Here is a talented actress." It said, "Here is someone who can make the audience deeply uncomfortable and keep them watching anyway." That is power, but it is also a risk. Because once the public attaches you to a role this strongly, it stops separating you from the emotional residue of the character as cleanly as it should. The performance lingers, the face lingers, the atmosphere lingers. Viewers start feeling like they have learned something about you, when what they have really learned is how powerful you can be inside fiction. And sometimes, especially with darker roles, that illusion becomes dangerous. Still, before any of that turned against her, the glory gave Kim Hieora what so many actors spend years chasing without ever touching. Not just fame, not just visibility, but impact. The kind that makes casting directors look twice. The kind that makes audiences remember your face before they remember your name. The kind that turns a working actress into a conversation almost overnight. And maybe that was the cruel setup hidden inside the success. Because once a role makes the world look at you this intensely, it becomes much harder to survive the moment the world starts asking what, exactly, it is seeing when it looks back. And then the role stopped feeling like fiction. That is the point where Kim Hieora's story turned from breakthrough to threat. Because there is something especially volatile about a performer becoming famous through cruelty, just before the public begins asking whether cruelty exists somewhere in her real past too. Most actors are protected by distance. They play monsters, and the audience leaves the monster behind when the episode ends. But Kim Hieora's rise did not get that luxury. The face people had just attached to one of the most disturbing forces in the glory was suddenly being dragged into school violence allegations of her own. And once that happened, the atmosphere changed instantly. No one was watching neutrally anymore. People were not just asking, "What happened?" They were asking something much darker. Did we see great acting, or something that came from somewhere real enough to recognize? That is what made the scandal so explosive. In 2023, reports surfaced accusing Kim Hieora of being involved with a notorious middle school clique and linked her to verbal abuse, physical violence, and theft. She responded in a way that made the story even more uncomfortable to process, not with a simple total denial, but with something messier. She admitted that she had been part of the group and that she had lived as a bystander, but denied taking part directly in the more serious acts people were describing. She apologized for not being free of responsibility, while also insisting she had been pushed into a version of herself that was not fully true. That kind of response does not calm a scandal, it complicates it. And complicated scandals linger longer. Because now the public was stuck between two versions of her, not innocence versus guilt. That would have been simpler. Instead, it became admission versus denial, presence versus participation, moral stain versus legal proof. And in South Korea, where school bullying allegations carry a uniquely toxic social charge, that middle ground is often the most dangerous place to stand. Once the word hakpok enters a celebrity's story, image no longer belongs to talent alone. It becomes a referendum on character, on memory, on whether the public is willing to forgive a past it can never fully verify, yet cannot emotionally ignore. That is when Kim Hieora's career froze. The woman who had just been rising into visibility through one of the year's most unforgettable performances was suddenly being forced into silence, rebuttals, statements, and moral suspicion. The timing made it even crueler. She did not fall years after success, when the public might have had emotional distance from her image. She fell at the exact moment her face had become unavoidable, which meant the scandal did not merely interrupt momentum, it fused itself to her breakthrough. For many viewers, the role and the controversy began bleeding into each other until it became hard to think of one without the other. And maybe that is the most painful part of her story, not that the accusations appeared, but that they arrived at the precise moment the world was finally ready to see her. After years of waiting to be noticed, Kim Hieora became impossible to ignore, only to discover that the spotlight does not care whether it is revealing talent or tearing open the worst version of your past. And once the public starts looking at you that way, fame no longer feels like a reward, it feels like exposure. What do you do with a face once it has changed meaning in public? Do you keep watching it the same way? Do you pretend nothing happened? Or do you look at it forever through the shadow of the worst question attached to it? That is where Kim Hieora's story sits now, not in a clean redemption arc, not in total ruin, but in that colder, harder place where a person returns to the public eye, and everyone realizes the return does not erase the fracture. It only proves the fracture is still there. Because Kim Hieora did come back, and that matters. After the controversy, after the pause, after the long stretch in which her name no longer carried only the force of the glory, but also the weight of school bullying allegations, she stepped back toward work again. Publicly, professionally, visibly. That kind of return always means something. It means the industry is willing to test the temperature. It means the person at the center of the storm has decided silence cannot be a permanent life. It means the audience is being asked, quietly but unmistakably, to look again. But look again how? That is the real problem. Because a comeback is never just a comeback when the scandal attached to you was moral, emotional, and tied to the idea of who you were as a young person. If the damage had been simple gossip, people might have consumed the return as spectacle. If it had been a career slump, they might have framed it as resilience. But Kim Hieora's case was different. The accusations cut too close to character, to memory, to whether the darkness the audience saw on screen had some echo in a real-life past it could never cleanly separate from the performance. And once a public figure is trapped in that kind of question, returning is not the same as being restored. It is more complicated than forgiveness, more fragile than vindication, more unsettling than a fall. Because when people see Kim Hieora now, they are no longer only seeing an actress, they are seeing two stories layered over each other. The first is the one the industry once rewarded, the long road performer who waited years, then broke through with a role too sharp to ignore. The second is the one the scandal forced into place, the woman whose breakthrough became permanently tangled with accusations that changed the way people interpreted her face, her intensity, even her stillness. Those two stories now live together. And maybe that is the true cost of what happened. Not that she disappeared, not that she was erased, but that she became impossible to experience innocently. That is what makes the present so eerie. Her talent did not vanish. Her screen presence did not vanish. The thing that made people look at her with fascination in the first place, that watchfulness, that edge, that feeling she could disturb a frame just by standing inside it, all of that is still there. But now the audience receives it differently. What once felt electrifying may now feel loaded. What once looked like pure performance may now feel like a question. And how do you build a future inside that? Maybe that is what makes Kim Hieora more interesting now than before, not because scandal makes people deeper, it doesn't. But because after a scandal like this, every return becomes a negotiation between art and memory. The public has to decide what it believes it is watching. A talented actress? A contested figure? A woman who should be allowed to keep working? A woman whose past should remain attached to every new role? No matter which answer people choose, none of them are simple. So, this is not the story of a woman who cleanly fell and beautifully rose. It is the story of what happens when success, controversy, and identity become fused too tightly to pull apart again. Kim Hieora is still here, still visible, still working, still carrying the same face that once made audiences shiver for fictional reasons and now makes them hesitate for real ones. And maybe that is the final tension of her story, not whether she can come back, she already has. The question is whether the public will ever allow her to return as only an actress again, or whether, from now on, every role she plays will walk onto the screen carrying the ghost of everything that came before. Factual backbone for this ending. Kim Hieora's 2023 response acknowledged being associated with a school clique and being a bystander while denying the more serious allegations. And by late 2025, she had publicly reflected on returning to acting after more than a year away amid the controversy.